Home Alone is arguably the most bulletproof holiday classic in cinema history. It's the film that turned Macaulay Culkin into a global icon and transformed the slapstick genre forever. But behind the Christmas comfort of the McCallister home, the reality of this production was fragile, nearly derailed by a studio shutdown, and built on a foundation of genuine child actor fear and grueling 23-hour workdays. Most people remember Home Alone as a simple, lighthearted comedy, but the reality is much more calculated. It was a high-stakes gamble, engineered through a clandestine studio handoff, improvised dialogue from comedy legends, and practical effects that were literally dangerous. Today we're looking at the 40 secrets that quietly shaped this masterpiece, and why, 30 years later, you're likely remembering the film's magic as a series of fortunate accidents and hard-fought creative victories. At its core, the story of Home Alone is a psychological exploration of every child's greatest wish and worst nightmare. It follows 8-year-old Kevin McCallister, the black sheep of his massive family, who's accidentally left behind when his parents and cousins fly to Paris for Christmas. What begins as a joyous spree of eating junk food and watching grown-up movies quickly pivots into a high-stakes survival story. Kevin discovers his house is being targeted by the Wet Bandits, a pair of career burglars named Harry and Marv. The film shifts from a whimsical domestic fantasy into a siege thriller, where a small child must transform his home into a battlefield, using household items as improvised weapons to defend his castle and, ultimately, learn that the family he wished away is the only thing he truly needs. The journey of Home Alone didn't begin in a boardroom, but in a moment of pure vacation anxiety. Screenwriter John Hughes found his spark while making a travel checklist for a family trip, wondering to himself, what if I forgot my kids? This relatable fear led to the film's first core concept, but the Uncle Buck spark was what truly gave it life. Hughes had recently filmed a scene in Uncle Buck where a young Macaulay Culkin interrogated a babysitter through a mail slot, and he realized that an entire movie could be built around that specific energy. Hughes was so inspired that he famously wrote the entire screenplay in just 9 days, expanding 8 pages of notes into a full-length script at a breakneck pace. However, the production was incredibly fragile during its early days. The film was originally set up at Warner Brothers, but the studio shut production down over budget concerns. They were unwilling to go from a $10 million budget to $18 million. In a move that feels like a spy movie, the script was clandestinely delivered to 20th Century Fox to bypass legal hurdles and save the film from being erased. This handoff wasn't the only major shift. Chris Columbus only took the director's chair after leaving National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation due to a personality clash with Chevy Chase. Once Columbus arrived, he performed story surgery, adding the character of Old Man Marley. This was a calculated creative decision to give the movie heart and a thematic anchor beyond the cartoonish slapstick. The casting of the McCallister clan was a mix of family ties and industry icons. Kieran Culkin, Macaulay's real brother, was cast as the bedwetting cousin Fuller, starting a Culkin dynasty within the film. But to make the stakes feel real, Columbus utilized method acting on set. Joe Pesci, who played Harry, purposefully avoided Macaulay between takes so the child actor would be genuinely afraid of him. This wasn't just a psychological tactic. It became physical during a finger-biting rehearsal when Pesci actually bit Macaulay's finger, leaving a permanent scar that the actor carries to this day. Pesci also struggled with the film's family-friendly tone, constantly accidentally swearing on set until Columbus suggested he say fridge instead of the F word to channel his character's rage. While Pesci brought intensity, the legendary John Candy brought a marathon of improvisation. Candy filmed all of his scenes as the polka king of the Midwest in a single, grueling 23-hour session, making up nearly all of his dialogue on the spot. This was a pivot from the studio's original plan, as Robert De Niro had been the first choice for Harry but turned it down. The production was filled with these invisible rules and creative fixes. For the famous photo of Buzz's girlfriend, Columbus felt it would be too mean to use a real girl's photo for a joke about her being ugly, so the production used a boy in a wig instead. Even the film's most iconic moment, the hands-on-face scream, was a total accident. Culkin was supposed to move his hands away after applying the aftershave, but he forgot, creating the parody of Edvard Munch's The Scream, and that would eventually define the movie's poster art. The McCallister house itself became a character, but the reality versus film logistics were complex. While the exterior is a real home in Winnetka, Illinois, which recently sold for over $5 million, most of the interiors are actually built inside the gymnasium of a disused high school, because the real house was too cramped for a film crew. This allowed the team to build temporary features, like the zip line and the treehouse specifically for the movie. They even added a basement horror in the form of the scary furnace, which wasn't original to the house. To make the home feel like a Christmas comfort fortress, the interior was meticulously designed with a warm red and green palette, intended to make the eventual violation by the burglars feel more impactful. When the siege finally begins, the practical effects took center stage. Daniel Stern, who played Marv, agreed to have a real tarantula named Big Al on his face for exactly one take. To avoid spooking the spider into biting him, Stern had to perform a silent scream, miming the noise and having the actual audio dubbed in later. The fake movie Kevin uses to scare the burglars, Angels with Filthy Souls, was a mini masterpiece in itself. Shot specifically for Home Alone using vintage lighting to look like a legitimate 1940s noir. Even the weather was a technical illusion. Most of the snow was made of instant potato flakes, which reportedly began to smell terrible as they rotted under the production lights. The traps themselves were a mix of manual animation and physical grit. The impact of the BB gun shot to the forehead was achieved with painstaking frame-by-frame, hand-drawn animation because CGI wasn't an option. The candy glass ornaments Marv steps on were made of hard sugar, though Stern still wore rubber feet for safety. For the head on fire stunt, the crew used the Pepper's Ghost illusion, reflecting a real flame onto a glass pane in front of Joe Pesci's face to keep him safe. Even the near miss with the van was a clever trick. The driver drove in reverse away from the kids, and the footage was played backward to make it look like a high-speed near collision. The film's attention to detail extended to Kevin's map, which was actually hand-drawn by Macaulay Culkin himself to give it an authentic 8-year-old's touch. John Hughes' scripts were so specific, functioning like written storyboards, that the transitions between Kevin's battle plan and the actual traps were seamless. Joe Pesci even insisted on wearing a gold cap on his tooth to give Harry a distinct, slightly menacing visual signature. When Home Alone was released in November 1990, it became a record breaker, holding the title of highest-grossing live-action comedy for an incredible 27 years. It was a global phenomenon, particularly in Poland, where it became a national tradition to air it every Christmas Eve. The film's legacy has even spawned bizarre urban legends, like the Elvis theory, which claims a background extra in the airport scene is a secretly alive Elvis Presley. The film endures because it balances scary versus slapstick. The burglars were intentionally directed to be terrifying early on, so that their eventual defeat felt like a hard-earned victory for Kevin. Much like the movie Ghost, the emotional core relies on Kevin learning the value of his family through their absence. It was a production that took 83 days to film, spanning from a freezing February to a warm May. But it resulted in a thematic synthesis that remains the gold standard for holiday cinema. Home Alone survives because it isn't just a comedy. It's a story about the fragility of childhood and the endurance of the family bond. It was a film built on the vacation anxiety of a legendary writer and the literal scars of its young lead. Every choice, from the potato flake snow to the 23-hour John Candy session, was a calculated risk that created a holiday empire. What scene in Home Alone feels different to you now that you know the scream was a mistake or that the burglars were meant to be genuinely scary? Let us know in the comments. If these secrets changed how you see this 1990 classic, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into films that shaped our lives. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.